during this time. David Swanson, welcome to the Gravity Commons podcast.
Thanks for having me back, guys.
Yeah, we're doing this little series on how Christians are responding to the increasing hostility and violence in our country and the ways we're trying to show up in the public square. And I wonder, by way of introduction, David, if you can remind our listeners about your context, maybe your church, your neighborhood, and your parachurch responsibilities there in Chicago.
Yes, we are in Chicago. We planted our congregation 15 years ago. We're on the south side of the city, which, for folks not from Chicago, is actually the largest part of Chicago. It's not necessarily the part that folks come and visit when they're visiting Chicago, but we love it. It's an amazing part of our city. We're in a community, the church is called Bronzeville, which is a historic African American neighborhood. For folks who don't know Chicago, I say that it's Chicago's Harlem by way of kind of history, legacy, cultural significance, kind of tracks roughly the same timeline as Harlem does on a bit of a smaller scale, and remains a very important community and neighborhood today. Ours is an intentionally multiracial congregation in relationship with just fantastic Black churches, nonprofits, organizations who have taught us and led us really well over these past 15 years. And then our church also has a nonprofit organization that we launched about 8 years ago, New Community Outreach, whose work is really focused on restorative practices, restorative justice, mostly with young people in our neighborhood. We're serving about 200 young people in a few different high schools this year, in peace circles, doing work around relationship building and so on, as our small contribution to kind of an ecosystem addressing trauma in our community. So that's really great work that we get to be a part of as well. So yeah, that's the day to day, and then all the surprising stuff that's been coming up lately has been in the mix as well.
Yeah, and Chicago's been in the news, been fairly prevalent, reporting on, ICE being in your city. And I know that maybe that situation is changing or has changed. I wonder if you could just give us an update here. What's the situation currently in Chicago as it regards to the presence of ICE?
Yeah, so that has been something we've been enduring for a few months now. And then as of maybe a week and a half ago, Customs and Border Patrol largely left the city and went south. The sort of gallows humor here in Chicago is that ICE couldn't actually take the cold, and so they had to move south to continue their kind of abductions and terrorizing work somewhere else over the winter time. There is still a presence of ICE, in Chicago. It's not as though that is completely past, but it does feel very, very different right now. It does feel like we're catching our breath a little bit. The number of folks who were detained at the Broadview detention center has been reduced dramatically. It feels like a little bit of a breather. We've also, heard the possibility of raids in churches over Christmas time. We've also heard that they will return in the spring with an even larger force. All of that is hearsay at this point, but it's stuff that we're paying attention to. So it's sort of feels like a kind of cleanup moment right now. I was on a phone call. We do a weekly phone call with interfaith leaders in the city, and this past Wednesday, just hearing from folks in the Little Village neighborhood, which is the majority Mexican American community in Chicago. 70% downturn of the local economy, 50% decrease in church attendance,
Wow.
20% decrease in public school attendance. So that's sort of the wake that's been left behind. That's sort of the wreckage that's been left behind. And so local churches that were, already resourced to not affluent suburban churches, right? Already were community struggling even more due to nonprofits, local business, working more towards local businesses. And it feels like a cleanup effort right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, you mentioned the Broadview facility, and I know that there was some news reports about clergy seeking to take Eucharist to people who were detained there.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, you could talk about that if you wanted, but I wonder, if you could tell us a bit about how you and your church and the faith leaders there in your neighborhood, that area, how you all responded to the presence of ICE when they were most active in Chicago.
I think one of the things that's really important to say is that there's been a small group of Catholic lay people and clergy who have been going to Broadview for over a decade, just once a week on Friday mornings, no matter what the weather, and just praying outside of that facility. And I think it's important not to miss that right now because those were the mustard seeds and yeast of the kingdom for a long time when nobody else was paying attention. At least one of those Catholic sisters has passed away. Others are old enough where it's hard for them to get there now. But they were the ones who kind of cleared the trail, I think, for this moment that the church could even be in the position to respond right now. And so, we definitely honor them and their faithfulness. Broadview is outside of the city. It's in a suburb, and there's this, way in which over these months, uh, the ICE vehicles, unmarked vehicles, sometimes with license plates taken off, sometimes with license plates covered up, leaving the facility, doing their raids, bringing people back. This is very ominous, sort of feel, and not knowing where they're going to go and what they're going to do. And so, yeah, there have been Christians and faith leaders gathering there for prayer, sometimes a little bit more direct action, trying to actually lay their bodies down in front of vehicles, or making it hard for vehicles to leave or to return. But then, they're going somewhere. They're going to neighborhoods, they're going to suburbs, they're going to certain communities. And so it's been pretty impressive to watch local neighborhoods organize themselves through signal chats, through rapid response trainings, folks carrying around these orange whistles on their necks, sort of being ready to draw attention if ICE is seen in the community. Very grassroots, very 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 localized in the different communities. And then the word goes out. ICE has been spotted, and the community gathers, the community rallies. One of the things that I've been really interested to notice is how present white clergy have been in our city right now, and that's been really encouraging to me. With the way that the Supreme Court has more or less justified racial profiling in ICE's operations, saying that it's legal to racially profile those that they're detaining. It has seemed to me a moment where white people have needed to really be visible and really step up in a way that, frankly, our racialized society allows us to do, and makes it dangerous for others to do. And that's been the case in Chicago. I've been really, really grateful for that. But you don't know what you're going to find when you show up. Sometimes it's too late because it's kind of a hit and run situation. Sometimes streets are barricaded off. Sometimes there's tear gas that's been deployed. The feeling from my experience, and then in talking with others, is that it is a campaign of intimidation, of terror, of cruelty. The message that's being sent is, you need to be afraid. We are in control. We can do what we want to do. There have been so many different court orders over the few months here in Chicago, and they've just ignored every single one of them about where they can be, about how they can deploy their tear gas and so on. They just repeatedly just roll right over every single one of those. So that feels that's a new experience for me in my years of kind of being in street situations or protest situations, observing and experiencing that level of disregard. That feels new.
Yeah. I wonder, David, if you could just share with us, what theological commitments guides you? Um, like, how do you discern civic involvement and your witness?
Yeah, that's something I've thought about a lot, Christy. And I can say I'm still thinking about that, still discerning that. It's not as though I've arrived. Um, the phrase that I come back to time and time again in these situations is bearing witness. I think for the Christian, whose faith is totally dependent on testimony, bearing witness is just what we do. And we do that in lots of different ways. We bear witness to the Lordship of Jesus, but we also bear witness to the presence of Jesus among those who are vulnerable, among those who are suffering, among those who are made to be terrorized by our government in this moment. And so I think what the church does in seasons like this is we show up and we bear witness. And I think that bearing witness can look many different ways, but fundamentally that's what we are doing. We are in incarnational people. We recognize we can't do this from a distance, and so we bring our embodied selves to the intersections of these events, and we are present. And that presence can take different kinds of shapes, and different ones of us will have different kinds of assignments. Again, like I mentioned before, in our this kind of racialized moment, there's lanes that I can take that maybe somebody else can take, but we bear witness to the presence of Christ amongst those who are suffering. And then we discern how best we can do that. Sometimes we lay our bodies down, and sometimes we are, appealing to the structures of government, that the levers that we still can pull for the benefit of the vulnerable, and so on. But that has been the frame for me. I don't have to know what I'm going to find when I show up. Frankly, I don't have to know what the result is going to be. Like, this is not a question of efficiency. Nonviolent participation is often not efficient. It's often not immediately effective in the way that we would want it to be. It can be, it has been historically in our country, but if it's not, that doesn't mean that we don't still do it, because this is what Christians do, is we show up and we bear witness.
What yeah, when you put it that way, David, I think there's I still talk with people who, that's just not their frame for what a Christian should be doing, with their faith in terms of civics and politics and that kind of thing. So I really appreciate your just your very simple way of articulating why it is that you have chosen to do what you do, why your church and other, as you mentioned earlier, just other faith leaders have chosen to respond to this terror and cruelty and violence, as you've said. I wonder what, as you've engaged in this work, I wonder what you have learned. What has perhaps changed for you as a result of what you've experienced in this, bearing witness?
Yeah, I'll begin somewhat confessionally. I think I'm more in touch with my own weaknesses over these past few months. I was watching. There was an action that took place out at Broadview, actually a week ago today, led by clergy, and it was more of a direct action where it was very likely that clergy would be arrested. And I'd known about it leading up to that time, and supported it. I thought it was a wise and very thoughtful plan, and really kind of wrestled leading up to it whether I would participate in it or not. And ended up deciding that I wouldn't, for a handful of different reasons. My own sense is that as much as possible, I need to be in my own immediate community. There's times to be in other communities, but I need to be as local as I can. And I've also discerned some things about some of my own kind of vocational bridge building between different communities. And so it felt okay for me to kind of release that and, cheer it on from a distance. And then a few days later, I was watching some of the footage from it, and the state police got pretty rough with the protesters, who were very clearly nonviolent. They were, as Matt said before, they were requesting access to those who've been detained to provide pastoral and spiritual care. That was it. That was the request, and it's been denied time and time and time again. Doesn't matter who's asking. The Catholics have asked for it. The Protestants have asked for it. The mainline Protestants have asked for it. The evangelicals have asked for it. It's just no, 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 no. There's just it's a non-starter, which is wild when you think about it. Like just crazy to me that
Yep.
a political regime that has clothed itself in the language and symbols of Christianity will not even consider like allowing clergy to so that's
Yes.
another whole thing. Anyways, I'm watching this video and it's intense, and I'm starting to sweat, my adrenaline is starting to like climb, and you guys are better at this trauma informed stuff than I am. I'm like, oh, my body thinks I'm there right now. Like my body thinks like I'm back at Broadview getting shoved around as I have before. And part of what I've been learning is that like I can't be everywhere. I can't, as hard as it is to not, as hard as it is to know that there's something terrible going down somewhere in the city and not just drop everything and go and be in that space. It's not possible, and it's not good. It's not healthy. And so I think I've been grappling a little bit with some of my own savior instincts, my own instincts to want to fix and to, to be as present as possible. That would be one. The other is that there's a real tendency right now to be back on our heels. Like it is just it's a full, in your face attack, and it feels like we're just trying to find our footing and kind of defend ourselves as best we can, and that's true, and that's a part of it. I've continually been provoked, I think, by the Spirit to ask, where is the invitation right now? Where is God inviting God's people to press in, to be present, to be open to some creative thing that we just wouldn't have been open to before? And one of the ways that's showing up right now is in a kind of cross-racial solidarity in our city, where churches and communities of faith are joining up and reestablishing relationships that had maybe kind of grown cold. And that feels like something we really need to pay attention to right now. So it's this odd balance of needing to be able to respond quickly to the genuine threat and being open to something surprising that could be possible right now that wouldn't have been possible 6 months ago. So as an example of this, some of the churches in Little Village invited the whole Chicagoland church to show up on a Saturday and to pray, to sing. They said, we feel so alone right now. Our neighbors don't feel safe going out. Our businesses are closing. We feel really alone. Would you come? And it was amazing. Hundreds of people came out on that Saturday afternoon, gathered in this parking lot, incredibly multiracial group of people. And there were folks, praying in Spanish and singing in English and giving short encouragements. And one of my friends, an African American pastor from the city, was one of the people to speak. And he said, first off, I need you to know that we're with you right now. And then he said, how this was really tender. He said, and we care about your children right now. And then he went on to say, we know something about what it's like to be racially profiled while we're driving down the street. We know something of what it's like to feel as though those who are meant to represent you and defend you are actually attacking you. And in his kind of confession and his testimony as a Black pastor, you just kind of feel this thing shifting in that space of people being pulled toward one another in this really significant way. So Ben, I'm trying to like hold both of those. Like we have to respond, we have to be present, got to move quickly. And if everything is urgent, I fear we might miss the Spirit's movement and invitation for his people right now.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. David, I'm thinking about the ways in which the sort of the emergent nationalistic, xenophobic violence, you mentioned fear, intimidation, threats, violence being used as the currency of strength and power, and how increasingly millions of Americans are either um, ignorant, either willfully or unwillfully ignorant about that, unconcerned about that, or in full support of it. And you put a quote on Facebook. I want to read it, and then I want to ask you maybe to help us understand why. You know, why? So here's the quote, and I believe this is you. So stop me. Don't stop me if you've heard this before. The Christians who once complained about threats to their religious liberty, clamored for law and order, called for pro-life legislation, and claimed to want a colorblind society are silent about physical attacks on fellow Christians and their clergy, the lawlessness of federal agents, MAGA's politics of death, and the overt racism of Trump's mass deportation agenda. Can you just maybe noodle on or riff on that incongruity and why you think it exists?
Yeah, I mean, it's a strange thing to recognize the kind of
Yes.
dissonance between those two. People who really kind of staked their claim, their reputation on some of those positions. This is what it means to be a Christian in this country. Is to fight for these things, is to organize for these things, is to vote singularly for these things, and then to watch what has evolved and how so often these people are not just tolerating, but saying, no, 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 this is actually exactly what I voted for. Like this cruelty, this death, this blatant racism is exactly what I voted for. I think, at my most sort of generous side, I want to acknowledge the media silos that folks live in. The kind of power of propaganda is really strong. And so at my most compassionate, I want to say that people may just not be seeing, or
Yeah.
may not be hearing what's actually happening. I think that's true. I don't know that lets us off the hook. And then there are others who I think the actual logic has been exposed, right? Like the
Mm.
logic was one of control, the logic was one of domination. And that is now just being expressed differently. But the aim, the desire is the same. It is to be in control. It is to be able to dominate others. It is be able to impose kind of your vision or your will on those with less political or cultural power. It's a super ugly thing to say out loud. I think for
Yeah.
those of us who would understand ourselves to follow Jesus, it feels gross to even say that, because it feels so antithetical to the person of Jesus and the way of Jesus and the teachings of Jesus. And yet, I do think that's what we're living through right now. I think this makes our response a little bit tricky too. We're going through Revelation as a church right now, and so it's like, oh, empire and idolatry,
Hmm.
and it wasn't Christian, right? Like it was Roman, it was pagan, it was Greek,
Yeah.
and so Christians existing in that situation, right? It feels a certain way, I have to imagine. For us, the thing that we are up against is completely cloaked in Christianity. It has been
Yes.
kind of sacralized, right? And so it is a different thing that we're navigating. And not to say there's not historical examples available to us. I think particularly the Black church is that example of faithful Christian people up against a so-called Christian nation. But I think for many of us who maybe didn't grow up in those kinds of traditions, there is a sort of maturing that's needing to happen right now, where we learn to see more clearly the the resources of our Christian faith, the kind of essence and heart of our Christian faith, the solidarity with those who have experienced similar dynamics, and to not break fellowship with them, while simultaneously being able to describe the blasphemy and the heresy that is, organized so much of what we're up against right now. I think we have to do that plainly. I think we have to be really direct about that. One
Mm.
of the tactics of the enemy is to confuse, and is to deceive, and is to make murky what is actually pretty plainly just evil.
Hmm.
And so that, I do think that's part of our work right now.
I wonder if you can kind of keep going with that, because I'm just we have names and faces and people that we know that um, who are persuaded by the Christianity that's on display in MAGA. And so,
Yeah.
what have you found to be like faithful and effective, like real practically?
Mm.
Larry and Lucy are in our life, so to speak. Like, how do we engage?
It's not theoretical, right? I mean, it's
Right.
Right. Yeah.
it's not something that we just wonder about. Yeah, we many of us will be sitting at tables next week over a Thanksgiving meal or
Hmm.
over Christmas, and so yeah, I think it's such a tender question, and I don't know that there's one singular way to answer this. I can tell you sort of where I've landed with this. I don't think Christians ever get to lie. I don't think we ever get to lie about anything. And once we recognize that we are lying or have lied, we confess and we learn to tell the truth about the thing we previously lied about. And so I think any peace that requires us to lie isn't actually peace. It's something different.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel really settled about that in my own heart. That doesn't mean I'm picking fights. That doesn't mean that like at the Christmas table I'm gonna start kind of lobbing truth bombs over dessert.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to lie. So I think that's a starting point. I think that the second thing I keep in mind is I am incapable of holding anything together. I can't keep my own thoughts together. I can't keep my own emotions together right now. Like I would be a mess. And I'm certainly not capable of keeping relationships together. But the Holy Spirit is. I genuinely believe that. And so my job is not to keep people at the table. That is what the Spirit of God does. And so if the Spirit is keeping somebody at the table who's deeply, bought into the MAGA ideology, then I'm going to stay at the table too. Like that's my commitment. If you're not going to get up and walk away, then I'm going to remain present as well. And I'm going to trust that the Spirit will do what only the Spirit can do in that conversation. Yeah. So those are some of like the underlying things for me. And then I think a lot of it is circumstantial in the moment, but not lying and trusting that the Spirit is the one who holds us together have been pretty important for me to keep coming back to.
Thanks, David. I wonder, as we would close here, if you wouldn't mind reflecting on how your present work uh, to advocate for just human dignity, justice, mercy with people who are um, unlawfully targeted and detained, how that relates to the work you've been doing for a while now. I know you wrote a book last year called Plundered, which is on the roots of racial and environmental injustice. I wonder if you could reflect for a moment about how racial and environmental injustice are seen, maybe, and even what we're talking about today.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think one of the things I was trying to get at in that more recent book was the sort of animating forces behind environmental and racial injustice, which I name as greed and theft, the sins of greed and theft. Systematized, globalized, now kind of organizing our world in such a way that it's hard to even see those things. And so I've been trying to kind of evaluate the this past year through that lens. So I'm constantly asking like, who's making money, like who's profiting, whose stock portfolio is going up. I read an article a week or so ago. There's a leaked a leaked report from one of the private prison companies in which the CEO is just like gloating, just over the moon at how things are going right now because of how much money they're making, just hand over fist. So I think that's one of the things I've been trying to pay attention to is like, okay, where are the forces of mammon? Where is the kind of spiritual wickedness animating in these different systems? I do think it's true that our struggle isn't against flesh and blood. This is one of the hard things right now. I want to categorize certain people as my enemies. It's just easier. And to kind of work to say what is behind that, what are the kind of animating forces behind that, And what would it then require of local communities, not just to like verbally oppose what's happening or to show up occasionally at a protest, but to actually organize ourselves around an entirely different logic, right? So if what we're seeing right now is a kind of exploitation and terror based on greed and extraction, in a kind of money economy run amok, okay, then what does it look for a local Christian community to operate by a completely different logic? Like it's going to impact what Sunday mornings look like. It's going to impact what our budgets look like. It's going to impact how we think about status and so on. So I think there's sort of visible in the moment tactics, but a lot of this has caused me to reflect on our own church and say, are we out of step enough with the logic of this world that we can just intuit not just the expressions of the evil, but the forces of evil kind of behind them and recognize what we're actually resisting? I think this is, this is what makes churches different, is we get to kind of do that sort of work and sort of think behind those sort of layers. Um, Long way to go still. We haven't arrived there, but I do feel like that's one of our invitations right now.
Yeah, David. I'm really glad you mentioned mammon, just because I get tired of hearing myself say that word, but it's such a powerful force. It's such a powerful authority and power in our world that functions on the level of assumptions, moral logics, common
Yes,
sense,
yes,
and I think
yes.
for-profit prisons are a great example of this. What is criminal justice for? And I don't think most of us have reckoned with the way that profit shapes the uh, the purpose of criminal justice, and how it changes what prisons are for, right? In the same way that profit changes the way that we take care of people who are sick, and it doesn't even need conscious volitional intent to do
Right.
it.
That's right.
Mhm.
That's right.
Um, and that's the level I think that is most pernicious, hegemonic, because it functions very it functions with by not being seen and by not being noticed. And I appreciate the work you're doing to excavate that, bring it to our awareness, ask questions about it, and then in a discrete, particular way, agitate for something more faithful there in Bronzeville. Um, I appreciate you joining us today, David. If people want to learn more about you and your church, maybe the things you've written, where can they go to find you?
Yeah, thanks again for having me, all. My website is just dwswanson.com, and yeah, all the stuff and links are there.
All right. Well, David, thanks for being our